do a little fade in, fade out.
Yeah, I'll just do something like that. Oh yeah, can't change too much or it'll look. Hello and welcome to Slash Dupe, the mysterious movie pitching podcast with a twist. An episode today for you focuses on black and white films. So in typical fashion, we've decided that an episode on black and white movies requires us to broadcast to you in black and white. So those of you listening on the podcast, you can rewatch this episode on YouTube. If you are already listening to the podcast, snap the bell button, smash the like button, punch the subscribe button. What you have to do is just add absolutely everything you can, like, follow, subscribe, and share. And we would very much appreciate it.
It's just the brothers. It's just the brothers today on the special. We've just got the two of us rolling in.
And it's a privilege if you watch it on the YouTube channel at Slash Dupe, because you're able to see what we have tried to cobble together as, sort of 40s, 50s appropriate attire. I have a time appropriate mug, which
is probably that old as well.
I mean, legitimately, we got it from our nan's house. God knows where she got it from.
Not a sponsor, by the way.
It could be. Other chocolatiers are available. Ryan was talking about maybe looking a bit too Western, but Treasure of Sierra Madre. There are other sorts of there's a whole wealth of fantastic black and white.
Wearing a waistcoat of our grandfathers, a paisley waistcoat of our grandfathers that doesn't fit me.
But you can't see below the waist, so it's absolutely fine. And funnily enough, I'm wearing Granddad's cap, so we've got that sort of connection from the era of those that began their journey of cinema in the realm of black and white. We want to bring to you something that we've been thinking about for a while. The idea of black and white films has been very critical and important to Slash Dupe, but some of you out there may know why, and some of you may not. Black and white movies are special to us because George Miller of Mad Max fame, while finishing the fourth part of the series Fury Road, he remarked on how much he loved the stark black and white look of the Slash Dupe. And he said, in response to the black and chrome edition of Mad Max Fury Road, he said the following. It's the first time we've got a quote. I quite enjoy this. I'm feeling very sort of newsreadery. I'm not going to do his voice, but I could. He said, in response to the black and chrome edition, he said, but that all started way back in the old days when I saw the Road Warrior in the recording studio, when composers used a Slash Dupe rough, a black and white cheap version of the ungraded film, so they could mark it up with chalk with the orchestra and the conductor. I remember watching it and thinking, Road Warrior is much better as grainy black and white footage. It's somehow more distilled. I always thought, wouldn't it be great to do a Mad Max film in black and white? So our name, the essence of Slash Dupe, comes from the very product that is used in film production, and that is often in black and white. So we will have three parts to this special episode. And each time, actually, we start, in modern times, and each stage we go backwards.
Yeah.
We will start by discussing modern black and white films. For those of you who don't know, I'm Sean, your fearless moderator.
Yeah.
And I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, cohort, Ryan. Ryan, why don't you start us off talking about black and white movies for us?
So I think the first modern black and white movie I saw was one I watched with you, and that was The Mist. Was the first one that I saw black and white film.
Yeah.
And I remember, you bought a special Blu-ray version of it or DVD version of it, I think, way back when. And I'd never seen the film before. So the only iteration I've ever seen of The Mist is it in black and white, which made it interesting because it was that quite claustrophobic, sort of only stuck in the one location for a majority of the time in the supermarket, or I guess they still call it supermarkets in America, but the massive convenience store, I guess. And that was quite interesting. It was the first sort of, it's quite rare that you would, since color, do people try and push that. And I think the next one that we saw that,
just quickly, yes, you're right. So that, I think that was my first modern foray into modern black and white films, into a film that was in color, that had a black and white version created by the director.
Because Clerks, famously in black and white, but was done for that reason. Like, it wasn't, as you said, like, it wasn't one that was in color and then changed to black and white afterwards.
So when you look at something like The Mist, it was Frank Darabont's preferred version. Because obviously he was sort of, and we'll get to this later on, he was sort of really building on a love of those sort of maybe even 1930s, 40s sort of black and white horror films.
Yeah, your Harryhausen's,
the Ray Harryhausens and stuff.
Like that sort of
with the stop motion
movie, and
absolutely like King Kong,
the monster, because you only really see the monsters like that one time they come in and grab a guy's legs, don't you? And even then it looks quite janky anyway. And I think that's made sort of more retro and more classic by it being in black and white. Yeah,
I think so, and we'll get to that later when we get to something I never thought I'd say, and that's Zack Snyder's entry into the black and white film canon. We will get to exactly that. If that was undoubtedly an intentional thing to look backwards, Clerks and other sorts of films like that, which is a good thing to get onto now, they were black and white for other reasons. So Clerks was black and white because it was cheaper to get black and white film stock. So Kevin Smith, who's leader of one of the heads of the podcast revolution, and a legend in the sort of indie film world, his first feature he made off his own credit cards, and he did it with the only film stock he could afford. And I imagine that, like, so then you also move into, I mean, it worked for Clerks a lot, actually. And when you look at some of his other films, I think he's got a good eye for, well, he's got a good ear for dialogue and a good mind for characters and worlds, but the cinematography is not the strongest part of some of his later films. So actually, I think it really worked. When you look at something like Pi as well, we were talking about this earlier on when we were talking about Darren Aronofsky's Pi, another feature, probably also due to film stock prices for black and white film, but felt very much like it fitted the aesthetic of the film, fitted the plot. So it's very much like, if you like, about numbers, about binary, about newspapers and printing, it has a huge sort of part of the movie, and I don't know, just the way you sort of imagine Pi scrawled on something in chalk or in paint, it's sort of I think it really works. And there's plenty of those sort of indie films that I think start to then move out of it being budgetary and start to become more stylistic. So you've got Lahane, you've got things like The Good German. That's a really interesting one, The Good German, because that's a Soderbergh film, and he used the old lenses that they used and the old cameras that they used on Casablanca. So I mean, there's lots of different reasons. I mean, that felt like he was trying to capture something, which we'll maybe get to later on, which maybe similarly Ed Wood did with the Tim Burton film, and The Artist. So both films about filmmaking, both films about filmmaking in black and white. So I sort of like, I like that interplay, and it's, there was a place back then for larger budget, or the mid-budget film. There's a whole different episode to go into about mid-budget films, which has now really died out, but where you could release it in the cinema in black and white as a primary version, which Frank Darabont, I don't think was allowed to do it. The Mist, right? He had to sort of push.
You had to do it in color, yeah.
Yeah, and he had to push for a sort of home video release. I love the term home video, and I'm going to use it. I know that it's old school. You know, it's like I'll put on a record or whatever. But I like home video. I like that it encompasses everything. There's no way that I want to keep having to say.
Look, to be fair, like people love,
put
people
on the old
love
8K
videos,
Blu-ray, you know, whatever.
People love old cameras, old like 35mm dumps everyone puts out, don't they, where they get their old film cameras. People love records. You know, the next thing is going to be like those camcorders that record directly to a video. You know, that'd be the next thing, wouldn't it?
Max out and your VHS 8, whatever it was called.
That'd be the next thing that will come around. Like people going around making recordings with those specifically. Maybe we should go into business in that. Nobody steal this idea. All right. Nobody steal this idea.
But yeah, so plenty of people, and we're happy. I'd love it if the comments sort of lit up with people who are like, this was my foray into black and white films, whether it was a classic film, which we'll get into, or whether it was a more modern film that sort of, you know, opened you up to it. So most recently you'll look towards, well, I suppose that as filmmaking was evolving, you had things like Pleasantville, you had the Coen brothers, The Man Who Wasn't There.
Yeah.
You had Control, the biopic. So these films, you know, some were stylistic, some were sort of very much, it felt like it needed to be in black and white.
And I think as well, like everyone who's watching at home and watching on YouTube, you know, you can see that we're in black and white, and it's made easy because, you know, on Zoom we just chuck a filter on. But you have to think as well, if you want to be able to film something in black and white, you need to make sure everything's colored and lit correctly, because it's not just as easy as chucking a filter over it. You know, it's not every cells and frames have to be lovingly recreated so that certain areas are more lit and other ones are darker, and you know, you're not just chucking a grain over it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the process, for example, that we saw most recently from Mank. So that was like a big like Oscar hit because it's about Hollywood, and Hollywood loves itself, and like all films about Hollywood, you know, they make Oscars. Roma and Mank. So Mank specifically, I think Roma, I would imagine, was likely shot for black and white as well. Yeah. So when you shoot films for black and white, you have to change the colors. I mean, if you look at some fans out there will already know things like Hitchcock's Psycho, which by the way was in 1960 odd. So even then was a throwback. So even then it was using black and white film in a time when they would have used color film, which I think is quite fascinating in itself. We think of Psycho as being quite an old film, a classic film, but actually it was quite modern with a retro aesthetic.
Yeah,
which was fascinating. Hitchcock was way ahead of his time even then, even doing something that feels very classic. So that was when they got the blood, they had to do it, I think it was brown. There's lots of trivia online, but they had to change the color of it so that it appeared like blood on the on black and white film. So yeah, with things like Roma, with things like Mank has a good little behind the scenes about the colors that they had to put on people's faces and stuff to make it pop. But as we move into films that have, so they're on streaming services like Netflix, of course, so they're allowed to be like that, you know, and there's a niche for things like that. And so we're at a fascinating nexus. I don't know where it's going to go, but if you look at something like Parasite, for example, black and white version of Parasite, Bong Joon-ho, the director, mentions that he had to go back in and recolor it. So there's scenes with like mud and water, and so doing a black and white version of that film wasn't quite as simple as you might have assumed. You can't just whack a filter on it. Even then, when he did his version of Parasite, which, you know, set the world by storm by being the first foreign film to win a Best Picture Oscar, I believe. And even that came on the coattails of what we'll talk about, The Mist, but also Mad Max, Black and Chrome, Logan Noir. Yeah. So a whole host of.
So those two we saw in the cinema. I think both were, you know, they didn't get the widespread release that the normal color version did. You know, we went to, I think, either not a specialist cinema. We went to
I think we went to Prince
Charles for one of them.
Yeah.
And then the other one was like, I think we went to an Odeon in the middle of bumfuck nowhere in London to see the Blood and Chrome, not Blood and Chrome, Black and Chrome.
Black and Chrome.
And it was quite like a specific release to go and see it, which is interesting because you have to weigh up the commercialization. For throwback to the Adjudicator episode with Tom, you have to think about the commercialization and what will it take to make this into black and white. I don't know how many, aside from films that are specifically made to be in black and white, how much of that comes out of the director's pocket or a producer's pocket, or to be able to spend that time to release something additionally in the release pipeline.
Do you know, even I'm not too savvy on home video, but director's cuts, director's versions, they're quite popular. So one would assume that it costs less to make than it would be for people to sort of find it in the home video market. So the four that we'll focus on now before we move on to the next part are the sort of main four recent ones that I would think of. So I parked The Mist because I was never able to see that in the cinema. But I mean, I think it was Black and Chrome we saw first, wasn't it?
And that came out before Logan. And then even the black and white version. So I think that was I actually found it more enjoyable, weirdly, because I believe I saw Mad Max Fury Road in the IMAX, which obviously was incredible, but I found it like bizarrely, and I suppose in a good way, like quite overwhelming. Right. It's quite a big film. It's quite a shock how sort of simple it is and how much of a journey, it's just a journey. I loved it, obviously. Acting chops is what it takes to have a good black and white film, because you're not your focus is drawn. Your focus is genuinely drawn to the people who are acting, to the close-ups, to, you're not dazzled by all of the color and everything that's going on, so that's why we put so much stock in actors back in the day, because they had to hold it.
Absolutely. And something like Black and Chrome is really bizarre because you wouldn't expect a film like that to work in black and white, because it doesn't feel very character focused when you first watch it. Fury Road. When we saw the Black and Chrome one, it really feels like Furiosa's movie. You sort of feel that connection. So you do have those close-ups in the cab, and then when you see the broad vistas of all of the machines and the metal, you're able to sort of pick out gleaming sort of details, and everything feels sort of 3D in a way that you wouldn't think black and white would actually do. So I felt like when I watched it in black and white in cinema, I thought it was really like hypnotic. So whereas Fury Road in the IMAX is quite brash, which again you couldn't argue it is, it's a brash film in a good way, I thought it was quite hypnotic, the black and white, the black and chrome version. I was just in awe of it almost. And that for me is like not only the beginnings of Slash Dupe, but like also the beginnings of thinking about it in that way and hearing George Miller talk about it, but the beginnings of like a real love of like, okay, let's dig into modern black and white films.
So what are the other three in that list then? Obviously we said Logan.
So we saw Logan, that one we saw at the Prince Charles, didn't we? So we saw Logan Noir. Now I think, was it you or was it DK? I can't remember. It was one of our friends back home. We both went to buy the black and white noir versions of the Marvel properties. And I thought, do you know what? I want to get more into Spider-Man. So I bought Spider-Man Noir, which was great because when I saw his character in Into the Spider-Verse, I had a sort of connection with that. And so if it wasn't you, then DK would have bought, right. DK. So he bought Logan Noir. And that was quite a cool little, it's only a little Elseworld. And I'm sure the film, I've got some quotes from Mangold here. I've got a quote from him about it, the director, James Mangold. So I'm sure it didn't come from the comics, but it was nice to sort of feel that connection. They sort of called it Logan Noir. They could have called it something else. It was nice to sort of see the comic and the film sort of come to life in the same way. We'll get to what you thought of it in a minute, but I'll just pick out a quote from James Mangold here. He says, "One of the biggest reasons to do a black and white version is because I think there's something changing out there. People are looking for things that connect to the past, things that look different, things that are new, but also old again. I think for a long time, studios have had an assumption that you guys need bright colors all the time to stay amused and loud sounds to stay enthused. And I don't think that's true. I think audiences are getting more sophisticated and more interested in seeing creativity explored all sorts of different ways. Even if just for one night, seeing this movie this way helps people see that there's audiences out there for a monochrome movie, for a different kind of movie, in another way that's pretty great. So yeah, I kind of like, you know, he said, I mean, it sounds a little bit Slash Dupe when he says what is basically like sensible and nonsense, where people want something that's new and old.
Yeah.
But you get it, don't you? You kind of get it, especially with a film that was referenced when they were making it to be similar to Unforgiven, which was a Clint Eastwood Western, which in itself was referenced to be like an old classic.
Yeah.
Western.
I mean, we haven't even touched on black and white Westerns, and I don't think we need to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Primarily because I don't have much knowledge in the area of black and white Westerns.
But then our grandfather would watch all the Westerns, didn't he? Like, and now we go to our nan's, she flicks one on and she goes, "Oh, this is that with this one on it," because he loved them. But yeah, that's another piece there. But that's interesting. So I found that Logan Noir, I think for me it was, I think I'd watched it like twice recently before we saw it.
Yeah, I remember you had.
And so I was a bit like, oh, not again. But I could see, and it was interesting because it's all the snickety that he does. It's interesting how that comes out in black and white. You know, it feels like an anime sort of, which is interesting.
Yeah.
And sort of, and then there was a lot, you know, there's a lot of like amazing scenes, like the place he lives at with in the radar dish tower with
like the shards of like light,
and everything like that.
Yeah,
then it made it quite interesting. It sort of, then that felt like a bit of a Western, and then when they went to the farm area, you know, it feels like a bit of a creepy horror movie because they're in like that. So it was interesting that I felt like it brought the film across many different sort of genres. And made it sort of feel like it was a different film each time. And I think that's the interesting thing. I would say it had less of an impact on me than Black and Chrome did. Okay, I'm going to keep getting that wrong.
You're just trying to plug Blood and Song Monday night, 8 p.m. on the Blood and Song Twitch channel, where we do a live play of Dungeons and Dragons. Yeah.
Side hustle of the side hustle. And yeah, so I found it was less impactful for me, but it's still like little things. And I know this is a spoiler, but when she like puts the cross sideways to form the X, and then that looks like a proper old Western, doesn't it? Like that sort of with because his grave is just made out of rocks and stuff like that. So yeah, it was interesting. But I think you preferred it, didn't you?
Yeah, well, it's like you said, it felt like a completely new movie. So even though I had also watched it recently, it really did feel like I was watching something completely new. And I think it was like the image of The Thing, you know, like the cover of The Thing, the iconic thing with the light coming out of him. I have that image of Logan now, like with just light shooting out from behind him. And just because I think that they really cinematography is superb, but like it had a real attention to detail on light shafts and light diffusion and stuff like that. It was a very 3D image anyway, and then black and white just pulled that out. And it's interesting what you say about the horror thing, because when he meets himself, you know, spoilers, it's not really quite that. So hopefully we're not spoiling anything for anyone, but that's quite a horrific sequence, and it feels quite sort of quite shocking, quite like an old horror film. And then even all the modern stuff, because it's like a post-apocalyptic film, it feels very retro. So I think it was like, couldn't have been better. I mean, if they'd done it for I shudder to even say the name of it, but X-Men Origins Wolverine, if they'd done it for that, it would have been completely meaningless, right? It wouldn't have added anything. It wouldn't have felt like another dimension was added. So I think that alone is, you know,
and it makes it interesting. You said about the comic books, because obviously Logan comes the comic book Old Man Logan, which is sort of slightly different. Which is sort of slightly different, but that's what we thought that story was going to be about. And then they called it Noir as well, which sort of re-referenced the comic book, he said, which was nice. I think it was a really good sort of way to do that.
Yeah, it sort of made the film feel like it was for, I use the term fans in a genuine way, like for fans of the comics, of the character, who wanted to see something a little further away from some of the other X-Men stuff that I also love, but just something that sort of sat separate on its own. I've got a final quote from Mangold on it. He says, well, I think black and white focuses you on character in a way. It reduces the amount of eye candy, of color and distraction. But I think what it really is for most of us is a chance to connect the movie with movies of the past. It suddenly feels connected to Westerns and noir films, and I wish people would watch more of. Yeah, I think it's an exercise for real film fans to just enjoy. So I'm really grateful that there's this sort of free reign given to certain directors who will plumb for it and they'll push for it.
Yeah,
and it's right. It's interesting what you say about it focusing you more on the character, and I think we'll get to that a bit more later on. The third of the four that we're going to talk about briefly is Parasite, and I'm just going to go into a Bong Joon-ho quote. He says, because this actually spins off of what you were saying earlier on. He says, you can't just put it in a computer and turn it into black and white.
Yeah.
And he talks about working with his colorist on it. We can focus more on the texture, he said, noting the contrast of the very glossy and clean house of the rich family. He said, when he was talking about watching the movie, he said, for the first time, it felt like I was watching an old movie, a story from long ago. But the second time, the movie felt more intense. It felt more cruel. If you all watch, you will probably all feel differently. So yeah, it's that thing about having just a completely different experience with the same material. And you would think and some films may do this and it may end up just a gimmick. And that's what we'll go to very shortly. But the notion of like light reflection without color is just fascinating. It's fascinating. And so being able to see
everything we get taught,
the posh
light bounces through a prism, turns into color, right? That's what we are taught our entire lives. So to have that stripped away is quite an interesting thing.
Well, and you sort of you're more interested than in depth, I think, and foreground and background.
Whereas and textures, as he says.
And textures, exactly. Yeah, because with color, that's where you're drawn. And that's fascinating in its own right. But then with black and white, you're very much watching Parasite black and white version. You can really see the poorer family. You can sort of see they have that window, that's sort of like right because they're in a basement flat, essentially. And you can really see the world out of their window at like sort of foot level. And then when you have the layers of the sort of the garden, the glass, the stairs of the posh house. It's just fascinating, especially coming from a filmmaker like that, like a Korean filmmaker who really thinks about. They've got such an amazing. Korean film has such an amazing
cinematography.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating, fantastic cinematography. Really, really great. But they also are really fantastic at sort of volume. That's the best way I can describe it. So they know how to film a space. They sort of it's just fascinating. And I think like watching more Korean cinema with the idea of space is really interesting.
That's what your final degree piece was on.
Yes, I did it on Old Boy because that was. I think that's the sort of Tarantino of Korean.
Well,
cinema.
It was the first film that introduced me into Korean cinema, and probably a lot of people actually. Definitely,
and I think that we'll have a discussion down the line about world cinema and in particular Korean cinema. So that's Parasite. The final one I haven't seen. It's on my Skybox in glorious HDR UHD. I'm waiting to watch it, but because it's quite a feat, I just wasn't able to watch it before this episode. So it is just Zack Snyder's Justice League : Justice is Grey. So that's his. I think that's it, isn't it? There's no other extra subtitles or titles in there.
I did not realize he released a black and white
Did you not?
No.
Right.
Is this a black and white version of his director's cut?
Yeah, that's exactly
God.
what it is. Yeah. So you came over to watch the director's cut.
I did.
You know,
yeah.
it was going to be 4 parts on HBO, and it's about 4 hours long, and then in the end, it's one film segregated into chapters, and the internet is alight with Zack Snyder's Justice League, the Zack Snyder cut, and all sorts of stuff, and it's nothing that we need to discuss right now, I don't think. But I am really looking forward to watching it. So in the next couple of days, I'm going to sit down. I'll tweet out my thoughts probably, which has never done anyone wrong, has it? Just tweeting out your thoughts on something, especially not something about, the film industry where there's a, bunch of rabid fans. But I'm looking forward to it. And you and I, we you came over, we had an old school movie night when we were allowed to during the pandemic. And we and I absolutely loved watching it. I loved the experience of watching it with you and my fiance. I loved it. I love the experience of it. I'm trying to be very clear here.
No. And I agree. And I love the fact that because we could be analytical because we didn't care about it. Right. It wasn't like, shut up. I need to listen to this. What's happening. Right. Because we'd already seen it and we knew it was bad.
It was like a beer and popcorn film, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It wasn't like, I really need you to pay attention to Amadeus because it's really the most important movie to ever come out. You could just sort of think, well, this is Zack Snyder's world. So let me see, finally, the kid gets to play with his toys. Let's see what he does. And
we actually could talk about it. We're like, oh, actually, now this scene makes a lot more sense. Or now that thing makes a lot more sense. However, Zack Snyder releasing that in black and white sounds like a man jerking his toys off. That's what it sounds like.
Well, we all thought that when he wanted it to be 4:3 aspect ratio, right?
Yeah, but we let that one slide. We're like, all right, mate, fair enough. You can have that. But now thinking and calling it Justice is Grey.
It's just Zack Snyder through and through. And to be honest, if you're not, in a way, it's like Wes Anderson or someone. It's almost like I almost applaud that a man is gone full Zack Snyder. Do you know what I mean?
I understand like why, everything, the reason why he released the director's cut and everything that happened in his life. And, and he felt like he owed it to himself and the fans to release the director's cut. But I think this is now just a step too far.
Let me
I'm excited to see what you think when you watch it.
Yeah, no, definitely. And let me bring up a quote from him on it, and let's see if that changes your mind.
So start with "I'm the best," or
no, he's weirdly. Anyway, we could get. Humble, I don't know what the person is like, but what I do know is that I'm grateful from an analytical and technical perspective to been able to have seen his cut, right? And I think it's fascinating how the Hollywood machine and producers and people who come on and rewrite and redirect, and then how that's all partitioned in terms of guild sort of credits and other things. I find it really fascinating. So as an exercise, and I'm really glad it exists. And I'd much rather have Zack Snyder's 100% of something, frankly, than his 20% of something, which is what Justice League was. So, but I don't know what it will be like in black and white. This is the quote I could find on him talking about it. So he said, "For me, the movie has lived. When I left the movie, I kept it on my laptop and I turned it black and white in some sort of cathartic and sort of visual, I don't know, protest, or whether it was some kind of way of dealing with this whole thing." So that's what he said. "But I had it," he continues. "I turned it black and white. And so for me, the movie lived in black and white for 2 years and still does, because one of the caveats when I said I would finish the movie was like, I also want to finish a black and white version of the movie." So that's fine. I mean, the studios will go, yeah, whatever. Once he's done his cut of the version, all the money would have gone into it. Making it black and white is probably not going to be too complicated after that, right?
Whatever. It's COVID times. You do what you want, Snyder. Right?
They'll say yes to Snyder, definitely, for the black and white version. But it's interesting that I find that fascinating. And I find that sort of... I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it. So he would have done it as almost like a protest. He would have turned it into black and white. I don't know. I don't know what that means. And for him, he sort of, for 2 years, it lived in black and white on his laptop. That's fascinating.
So I find that, I don't know, it seems very Snyder to do that, right? And I cannot wait to hear what your view is on it afterwards, whether it does make it better, whether it makes it worse.
Well, the one thing I imagine before I watch it primarily is that a lot of his designs are quite old school and quite clunky. So like, I know they sort of try and look modern, but they sort of, in doing so, they look like action figures. So they actually look quite sort of bulky, like big suits that you could only get on people when you had to use physical stuff. You couldn't just CGI stuff. So I'm quite interested in seeing like the parademon stuff. We'll get to this, I think, very, very shortly when we move on into like the 40s and 50s retro sci-fi. So I think that it will look a bit like an old Penny Dreadful. It will look like maybe like an old comic strip in black and white. And some of the design and chunkiness, you know, where you could only draw it chunky, might actually work. So I'm positive it can't be worse, right? So at least it's, you know, I'm excited about a new version of it, which I suppose is the least you can ask for with one of these, is that if it doesn't have a reason like Logan Noir in its history, or Parasite in its influences, or you know, sort of Fury Road in sort of an idea that the director had when he was making. Yeah, exactly. Then at least an alternative version hopefully will be interesting in some way. So just before we move on, I'm just going to cap it off with George Miller's second quote on the Slash Dupe. He says, "Way back when the score for Mad Max 2 was being recorded, the orchestra would play to a high contrast black and white Slash Dupe. This was a sacrificial print and a lot cheaper than a colored version. I was struck by how much more iconic the images felt, more elemental, abstract, and authentic. Ever since, I wanted to see a Mad Max movie in black and white." So in the second part of the black and white special of Slash Dupe, we reflect on modern movies that could have been or should have been in black and white. So I've been, and then we'll settle on our favorites as well, or our favorite at the end. But I've been fascinated about this for a while. And there's, as we were talking about earlier on, it's not just, you can't just turn the contrast down or do what we've done today and just put a black and white filter on or do it in post. There is an element of that where you can do it, but something intentional is what we've been talking about, you know, for the last segment. And that intentionality, sometimes I wish was there. So there's so many films I think would, a sort of authentic black and white version would be really sort of powerful. Some of the things I think of, and I think they're easy ones to go to, so I'd like to move away from them if we can, but sort of if you think of like maybe early James Gunn films like Slither, or I think there was a Timothy Olyphant did a version of The Crazies, a modern version of The Crazies. Films like It Follows, films like The Descent, Neil Marshall's The Descent, possibly even Dog Soldiers. I mean, it's, classic. You know, so sort of old school horror films, even though they're modern, they would, I think they would, like, with a black and white wash, they'd look amazing.
So one of the films that I thought would be interesting to have to be in black and white, but I'm not sure how I would do it, would be Hugo. Because I think it pays homage to, I can't remember the name of the filmmaker, George.
George Miller. I made some notes and then I've lost them in the wash. So I'm glad you mentioned it. Yeah, the films of George Miller. Yeah.
But I think that'd be interesting because, you know, they do show those bits in black and white when with the films that he made. But so I guess that would be the only thing that wouldn't work, because the joy in that is seeing all like the fantastic color and then seeing the black and white and how he made those films.
You know what you might do? You might colorize that. I don't know if it's blasphemy.
Like the other way around.
Yeah, exactly.
But Hugo would be an interesting one, definitely, with all the clockwork and everything like that. Would be really beautiful to sort of see.
Also, the novel, I've got the novel. It's a tome. Well, I guess it's like a kid's book, so it's got lots of sort of big font and stuff. But there's lots of sketches in black and white, and I think he has a book in the film and in the book, doesn't he, where he sketches some of his designs. So I think that's a good shout. I think that would sort of bring something to it. Yeah, definitely. I was always thinking of and we can do a separate episode about this, but Alien 3 is a very sort of, some of the shots in that, if you see, like, and I'm not talking about the horror stuff, like, which you touched on, but it feels like, we've talked about this before, it feels like a religious epic. And to me, it sometimes feels almost like,
because by the way, like
there's a cross in, no, well, yes, Alien 1 would look spectacular in black and white, right? Of course. And it's straight up horror, so it would look great. But I think Alien 3 for some reason feels more like it's got these sort of really like unusual sort of avant-garde like shots. You're always looking up. Always these stark sort of bulldog faces of the British actors, you know, all craggy and textured. And then you have the idea that it's maybe like a religious epic in similar terms to something like Andrei Rublev by Tarkovsky. So you've got this like 3.5 hour long epic and this story that weaves throughout it. And I just sort of, I love some of the imagery. I'm talking about the assembly cut, which is the best possible version of it. But, you know, in the assembly cut, you've got things like, it's just a wonderful, there's like a cross poking out of the ground. The guy's running in the old cloak. He looks like a monk, you know, like he was running across the beach. It's so stark and barren. It feels like a sort of Russian period film, basically.
Yeah.
And I would love to see it in black and white. Absolutely. And to a lesser extent, then I'm going to go completely different direction. Okay. I'm going to say Blade 2. So I'm not talking about Blade 1 because Blade 1's got quite a sort of modern Detroity sort of vibe.
Yeah.
But Blade 2, Del Toro, who did Kronos in black and white, as far as I'm aware, his first feature, Del Toro sort of goes back and mines the sort of aesthetics of the very Eastern European sort of vampire, sort of aesthetic. So I think a lot of the stuff he does in that movie suits black and white. And then you use UV light and things, and in the, they have the cap for the UV guns. There's, I mean, I know it's ludicrous and CGI is ludicrous, but there's lots of contrast in it. It's part of me that thinks Blade 2 in black and white would be.
I need to go back and watch Blade 2. I was so frightened of it when I was a kid.
It's a fright. Well, Del Toro does it, man. He adds, like he always does, more charm and more horror. So he's got like this lovely fairy tale balance of both, like an old sort of storybook. I'm just going to rattle through a couple of others before we move on. 28 Days Later, an obvious one, but that would be pretty cracking in black and white. London in black and white like that.
And the countryside, which we're so used to seeing in green.
Yeah, and that sort of brings back that escape, sort of horror escape, Invasion of the Body Snatchers type thing. I want to say Munich, which I watched recently to honor that it was the end of the Paralympics. So watch Munich again, and with the troubles in Israel Palestine being, of course, they're still ongoing, but being reported recently in the news here. I found that was quite a stirring, powerful film, and it's a spy film, but it's also, I think, listen, the themes there of black and white, the themes of like one versus zero or A versus B, this sort of idea of, it's, I think you could do something amazing with that in black and white. But of course, Spielberg probably doesn't want to tread old ground after Schindler's List in black and white. I think, mate, if you've got any more, you're going to have to cut me off. But I think Collateral would be amazing in black and white. I know it's digital.
What's the war film that with the sort of the CIA war film with Mark Strong in it?
Are you thinking Bridge of Spies, or that's a Spielberg, or are you thinking Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy? I mean, that would be great in black and white. I
think he like plays.
I think it's Tinker Tailor you're thinking of.
No, it's modern. He plays like an Israeli.
Body of Lies by
Body of Lies. Yeah. That'd be quite interesting.
Film. Yeah, that'd be pretty good. Yeah. Definitely. And I think anything with that sort of strong retro aesthetic as well works. So Gattaca would be good in black and white. I almost feel like that's a cheap one though, because of course it would.
No, I think we could go. So I think we could go off for ages, right? So what is if you had to take one, what film would it be? Your the favorite one that you wanted to see? Because there are so many. You know, we could even say Ex Machina would be really good in.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. No, so, listen, I'm okay with doing this for the next couple of hours, as long as everybody at home is. I originally thought I'll just give you the three I went past.
Okay.
Pirates of the Caribbean: Dead Man's Chest. I thought that would be a great black and white film. Krakens, sort of old school Harryhausen type effects and classic epic dialogue.
You have to say it like Harryhausen's. Monsters. Let's see Monsters Inc.
From Monsters Inc. Yeah. Deep cut. I sort of liked. Yeah, I did mention it a second ago, but Collateral has this sort of Night of the Hunter vibe. So I love Night of the Hunter. It's a black and white film. Robert Mitchum, superb. It's a really odd film, and there's something, I don't know, in a parallel universe, those films match. Night of the Hunter and Collateral are very similar. And Collateral is digital, but I think, I don't know, man, it feels, and of course it relies on its colors, but for some reason it says black and white, the starkness of the two guys in the cab. And I moved past Che. I really like the idea of that. Che, the Soderbergh sort of double feature, and the jungles you can have so much sort of light and shadow, and then this sort of idea of revolution. And I thought it was very sort of thematically relevant. Right. I parked those, and then I couldn't decide between two. So, because I think one's maybe. Listen, I'll just lay them on you. Blade Runner and The Matrix. So Blade Runner I love because the cassette punk vibe. Yeah. Obviously it's a film noir, right?
But there's a lot of black and white, sort of pseudo black and white in it. You know, when you think that, like, when he's doing it's Voight-Kampff, isn't it? Voight-Kampff test with the woman, with the female at the beginning, it's like, that feels quite black and white. When he goes to his apartment, it's always really dark. So yeah, I'd say that there is a stark contrast there between it wanting to be black and white and then also just having the laser cassettes of the.
I think it's almost a cheap one. It's almost a cheap shot, because I think that, like, if it was made now, Blade Runner, of course, it couldn't be, but if it was, it probably would be made in black and white. So I feel like it's already, music and character-wise, outfits, it's desperately trying to be an old school film noir, which is why I absolutely adore it.
Yeah.
And it's just as ugly and messy and stupid as a lot of film noirs are as well, half-baked and sort of mostly character-based rather than making any sort of real sense, which is why I love it. Again, so the cassette punk stuff I love, all the sort of, I think that lends itself well to it in the way that The Matrix doesn't. But The Matrix has such great cinematography in terms of, like, contrasting shadows, the angles that the Wachowskis use.
I can 100% see The Matrix in that. Because the thing is that, traditionally uses a lot of black and green, as we sort of know. And now, are we saying just The Matrix, or are we saying the entire series?
All right. I didn't think of that, and I'm very excited to think of that. But let's get to that in a second.
Okay.
If we think about just the first Matrix, first of all, there's a lot of horror elements in it, right? Not only is it played for horror, like the fields, when you see the fields for the first time.
Yeah, and the thing that goes in his tum-tum.
Things that goes in his tum-tum. Even just, and the music is like horror music,
lots of strings.
Don Davis is like, lots of like sort of horror strings. Think about, like, the Sentinels, man, what they look like. They have appendages that are almost like they would be animated, like we were talking about The Mist. So they're almost like tentacles that you see out of a Harryhausen thing, and they look quite sort of stark, like a 50s B movie.
So I haven't watched the first Matrix film in a while, but when you see the squiddies, squiddly diddlies, do they look badly CGI now?
No, they
So
really
that,
no, they still
because
hold up.
so it's not like what was the film Equilibrium, which has got some terrible CGI in it.
Mate,
terrible CGI.
Equilibrium.
I know.
My God.
But
there's no one on this earth that can't both love and hate Equilibrium at the same time.
Also, another one that would be good in black and white, actually.
Listen, you've nailed it, man. That's a fantastic choice. I was just going to point out very quickly that Equilibrium is almost like a review for itself, isn't it? It's a self-fulfilling prophecy that it just sits in that.
But so
I think in black and white that would be amazing. Yeah.
But I think that is, I can't remember what the point I was making with that.
Something about the CGI not holding up.
Yes, so I think that the squiddly diddlies in black and white would probably take the edge off of that CGI if it was bad.
Yeah, it would. I mean, I'm sure there's some comping stuff like in the first Matrix where they comp two things together that's probably aged a little bit because that's just how it works. But it would definitely bring up the horror of those things.
Yeah.
And there's loads of other moments in that film that are really genuinely sort of frightening. Even when he wakes up for the first time and he pulls the thing out of his tube out of his mouth and everything's all body horror.
And you know what? There would be one homage to Schindler's List, and it'd be the girl in the red dress.
Yeah, maybe black and white with like some very scant bits of color.
It would be like that one. It'd be like the girl in the black, girl in the red, and when he's like turn around and look at the girl in the red dress again, like that thing. That would be like one little homage to like Schindler's List, wouldn't it, if they did it black and white?
So the Wachowskis. So like what you're saying earlier on is they shoot loads of stark close-ups and there's lots of looking to the camera like in a fourth wall way, which is very film noirish. And the whites of, like, if you think about the first time you see Trinity, you see the whites of her eyes when she looks at the camera. She's on the phone talking about trying to avoid an agent, right?
Yeah.
And other sorts of things like that. You sort of really see it's all about vision. So, like, not only are they looking at you and you're looking at them and they're looking through screens and stuff, but there's also the contrast of the sunglasses. You take the sunglasses off when you're out of the Matrix, you put it on when you're in the Matrix. It's all about vision. So I think black and white has a real thematic resonance there as well.
Yeah.
And the whole retro 90s look of the Matrix, I think it could look good in black and white. It might age it in an acceptable way, so it doesn't feel too sort of 90s with the old phones and everything.
And I think having like I think you wouldn't feel too disenfranchised from it as well, because you are used to seeing it in blacks and greens, so you'd only be changing that one color. But by changing that one color and taking all the saturation out of it, it will completely change the way that that you would view the film. I think I think it'd be much more different.
But so then just before we go on to yours, Reloaded and Revolutions, I don't know. Do you know what? Just quickly, I want to hear your thoughts on it. Reloaded definitely has more fantasy monsters in it, right? It's got vampires in it. It's got ghosts in it. It's definitely got some aspects that might feel a little bit more comfortable in black
I
and
don't
white.
think it would work. I don't think it would work because like the car chases would feel weird.
It's all very modern Reloaded, I suppose, in an intentional way. And all the fights feel very modern in a very intentional way.
Yeah. I think it wouldn't work. I think it would be like a one-off special, wouldn't it? Like just the Matrix.
But then now you think about it, Revolutions, the bit in Limbo, the bit where they're fighting the machines, like an old school war. It's very sort of earthen and metals, and something about Revolutions, maybe the rain at night, and then when they fight, it sort of feels very much like
Fumi's Last Stand.
Yeah, and the Burly Brawl and everything, and like it's very. I'd be curious to see it in black and white anyway. Revolutions, I think. Feels very different from the other two.
So it's funny you mentioned the Wachowskis, because my choice, and this is clearly the influence that they've had over us in cinema, my choice for a film that I'd love to see in black and white is Speed Racer. Now, like, unbeknownst to...
well, that's a very curious decision.
Yeah, see, the thing is, to a lot of the Slash Dupe regulars who know that, like, Speed Racer is in my top 3 films of all time. But I think, and it's a film that relies a hell of a lot on its color, on its coloring. But you know, if you were to take the Royalton scene, the real race car driver, that whole scene, and think about it being in a black and white film, you know, as you said, they use a lot of polarizing front on like camera, close-up camera angles, which they would have done back in the past in old black and white films to sort of save, to change the depth of field, to save on, you know, quite often you see a lot of like face-ups with blurred backgrounds. And I think, you know, to sort of get those messages across, and, you know, you see what he's in when he's in the cockpit of the car and it's very like close to him. And, you know, to watch all of those like weird sort of colorings, like when they do the race in like in the desert and stuff like that. So I think it would all work, but also that film uses colors to differentiate like good and evil. You know, the sort of the who's good, who's bad, who's like their enemy to them, who's friendly to them. So it's interesting. I think that's one of the ones, but I would love to see like a version of it like that. And I think it would be quite difficult to, it would then take you back to that sort of looking at what's going on in the action rather than just all the pretty colors. Because I think I remember you sent me a link to a video about why and how they use their depth of color and why it's really important piece of cinematography, why Speed Racer is an important piece of cinematography in cinema. And I thought that was quite an interesting one to use for that. Well,
it's really bold. It's a really interesting choice, and it's almost the reverse of what you might think. And that's why I really like it. But because if you think about it, there's a lot of stuff that feels very modern. Obviously, the car racing feels very cartoonish and modern. But you have the echoes in the film of it based on old
motor
Formula
racing,
One or old motor racing, where you would have seen it in the black and white on screen. So you'd have that sort of connection to the old races. Also, they are such great sort of visual creators that whilst they used color in a really interesting way, they also used the frames in a really interesting way. And they did. So they used a technique at the time, which was really new, but now it's used everywhere. But that's, you know, but they used first of all a technique to capture an entire set so that they could recreate it virtually, which they also did in Reload and Revolutions, which was sort of almost laughed at the time. And now it's used on everything with CGI. Yeah. And they also they wanted to use cameras where they could have foreground and background in focus. And then, so that would allow them to then you do whatever they wanted with the focus, which again is something like, for example, now the iPhone does that automatically when you take a portrait picture. So their sort of isolation of foreground and background, which is what a lot of old films did, black and white films, you're right, is something that they do really heavily in Speed Racer. So yeah, I could see it being a really curious film, and it would be one that I wouldn't go, oh yeah, I know what to expect. You'd go into it thinking, I wonder if I love Speed Racer as well. I wonder what new experience I'll get from it this time, and what will also, like it's a very broad, very sort of, it's a very simple script. It's a very simple story. It's very broad. And I mean that in a good way. Obviously, that's their intention.
And you think of the aesthetics of his home life. I like that sort of 1950s sort of weird Jetsons, like bubble homes, aren't they? That's what they sort of look like. And then they go to the city and it's really plush and everything like that. And then there's the fight with the ninjas, you know? So more like nonjas, right? Which I think is the actual
classic John Goodman.
Yeah, classic John Goodman.
So that's a great shout, man. Like a really, really interesting choice, and something I would absolutely in a heartbeat want to go out and see if they did it properly and really thought about it and made it, rather than just turning the contrast down. So what would Slash Dupe be without our unique take, our special twist on a title? For the third and final segment of our black and white episode, we will be pitching an original take on a title. And in this case, it will be an old black and white film title that has been given our own Slash Dupe twist. So taken a black and white film we love. I love loads of black and white films, but I'm going to take one that I really love. And I'm just going to take the title as if there's been no previous film made with this title, and I'm going to roll with it and create my own. Or I'm going to do what we affectionately in Slash Dupe call a Dan, which is where I give you a one-liner and we all come up with it together.
Yeah.
But before that, I would like you to do yours first, Ryan.
All right, fine. So I'm going to pick a famous black and white film title that had one of the only instances of this famous writer's acting chops. And that is going to be The Third Man, which had Orson Welles in it. Or as when we were younger, we called Awesome Wells.
It was Orson Welles. Orson Welles was in it.
So this would be about the actual fake killer of JFK, because we always talk about Lee Harvey Oswald, and they always talk about the shooter on the grassy knoll. And then this is the fabled third shooter, essentially. Yeah. That was reported, or is sort of a conspiracy theory that there was one. Yeah. Well, this would be the additional conspiracy if the grassy knoll is the current.
This wouldn't be. It's obviously not Lee Harvey Oswald. Obviously not grassy knoll guy. There's a third. Yeah. There's a third man, essentially. Yeah. Interesting. So, how much of the film takes place before the shooting? How much takes place afterwards? And sort of how broad are we going, or are we going quite narrow on this guy? Or
I think it would be interesting. So after seeing some of the sort of claustrophobia of Manhunter, the I can't think of it. Is it Fincher?
The David Fincher produced, directed, sort of partially directed.
Yeah, so I kind of feel like it would be something like that. And they would definitely be. It would definitely be something like that sort of early, sort of forensic dictation. You know, it'd be interesting. It'd be interesting someone building, like, you know, you see dioramas of like little cities and stuff like that. So it would be like early 3D recreation technology. Like they get a diorama of the city and like put the people on, and he's like, it doesn't make any sense. And they're like, why? And there's like, look, we know he was like shot here, but, and then it would, you know, he'd have to talk about it that way, and it would be who the third man is. And then it depends, really. It depends on how you want to do it. Is it like, because recently with the second season of the Umbrella Chronicles, they went back to that time, and one of the characters is like, oh, I'm going to be a hero. I'm going to stop the assassination. And then there's a whole plot around that, which is really interesting. So, you know, I sort of don't want to do that. I want it to be like trying to figure out, and then it will sort of feel governmental conspiracy-ish. It will feel mafia conspiracy-ish, you know, like he's going up and like, he's, you know, going to like the dive bars, and he's like trying to, you know, find out what that is. And I think it'd be quite interesting. I think it would work for some kind of agency.
So we already have that partial forensic approach in the sort of Oliver Stone courtroom drama-esque JFK film. So is this going to be more of an intimate look at this guy, the third man? Is it going to look at his motivations, his part to play, or is it going to?
Actually, do you know what? I think I've just scrapped it. Right, I've pitched it to the studio and they hate it.
They go, "Oh, we've already got a JFK movie in the works. Peter Jackson's already on it."
No. It's still going to be a JFK one, but it will be from the perspective of the third man, who is the actual killer. And it would be
that feels better to me.
It would be this person setting up Lee Harvey Oswald, planting the catcher in the rye in his house. And, you know, like...
I'm not sure. Listen, I think that's John Lennon's killer.
But I thought they both had it. I think they both had it.
You might be right.
Yeah. And then setting up the thing on the grassy knoll.
So he's grooming. Oh, do you know what? It might not even be... So it might not even be that he actually pulled the trigger.
Get this. It's not the third man is actually...
A woman.
Slash Dupe twist. Slash Dupe twist.
Shyamalan, away! Yeah, listen, I like that. So when you take the element away of like there being evidence perhaps against there being a third man, but this is a person that's planting the story about the grassy knoll and grooming
Harvey
Harvey
Oswald,
Oswald. That's fascinating, and maybe you give credence as an alternative history version to some of Lee Harvey Oswald's behaviors and so on after he was apprehended.
And it's almost that idea of like, how would you be able to draw? There's a lot of interesting. There's that story of that Darren Brown tells about Hannibal Lecter telling the guy to eat his own tongue or whatever, like because he said all those horrible things to him. But like, it's sort of could you drive a person to want to do that? Sort of like an early mentalist, almost like being able to control like not just one person, but an entire. It's like the Mandela effect, right? Making everyone believe, like, or the reverse of the Mandela effect, isn't it? It's making everyone believe one massive thing.
Yeah. Listen, I like it. I like it. Maybe we want to, just before we move on, an actor on the third man themselves. Are we saying actually going to be a woman?
No, probably not. I think I was kidding with that. I cannot remember
Jessica Chastain, if it is going to be a woman.
That's probably true. It would probably be the guy. I can't remember his name now. He plays the Green Goblin in the new.
Oh yeah, good shout. Yeah,
Dane
DeHaan. Yeah, Dane DeHaan. He's just still Dane DeHaan. Yeah, he's just sort of magnetic and creepy enough to make it work. Yeah. He's sort of like a much creepier version of that kid who played Quicksilver in the X-Men universe and also is in American Horror Story. He's like, that's a handsome version of what we do. We don't want that guy. He's too handsome. We want Dane DeHaan. Sorry, Dane DeHaan. Yeah, we want you. We want someone who looks kind of like a goblin.
A green one.
Yeah.
Some chance.
All right.
What, you don't mean Aaron, whatever his name is, do you?
No, I mean the other guy.
Evan Peters.
Evan Peters. There's two sides of a coin. If this was being made by Hollywood, it would be Evan Peters. But if it's being made by, the Slash Dupers. Right. Okay. So that was great. And normally we spend plenty of time doing these pitches, but I quite like our quick fire ones today, so we can in and out before they turn out terrible. But also, conversely, before they also turn out good. So I've gone with one of my favorite black and white films. I would argue it was the black and white film I loved, the classic black and white film that I loved first. Mm-hmm. I think The Big Sleep was really, this is not what I'm doing. Big Sleep was really critical in getting me to enjoy.
Are you shawning yourself? But I'm actually going to pick this one.
No, I am. The Big Sleep is a film that sort of said, like, I don't know, it got me into the hard-boiled sort of world. And then I went back, Maltese Falcon, went back to Casablanca after I did
Chinatown.
Yeah, Chinatown's not black and white, but yeah, definitely, like, then I understood Chinatown, and you understand all these things. So I loved them all, but Double Indemnity was the one that went, right, everything be damned except for dialogue. And it just went, there's so many quotes in that movie, and the plot is ludicrous and it's cool, but you're not there for that. You're there for the one-liners.
Insurance, right?
Yeah, I sort of like that as well, where they used to make jobs like being an insurance investigator somehow sexy. Somehow these people were like Mad Men type people, or they were like, detectives from another, in another way, another description. So yeah, I love Double Indemnity. It's sort of almost like a cartoon, basically. It feels like a cartoon. It's so broad and sort of accentuated. But I'm going to take Double Indemnity, and I'm just going to say this: it's a late 90s, early 2000s rom-com set at a law firm. That's it. I don't, it doesn't even need to be about Double Indemnity. That's the whole point about if this movie was a trash rom-com. So I'm thinking.
I'm Googling what Indemnity is, because I don't actually know what it is.
On the front cover, there's the guy and the girl. They're back to back, obviously, aren't they? She's in a slinky dress. He's in a suit. And they, maybe Nah, there wouldn't be a heart around them. That's too 90s. But they're in a law firm. That's literally it. And they fall in love at a law firm, but neither of them will.
I'm gonna throw one thing out there. Not in a law firm, in a like sort of like a financial services, right? One. Oh no, hold on a minute. I've got it. So indemnity, according to Google, a sum of money paid as compensation, especially for one paid by a country defeated in a war as a condition of peace. So he's in company A and she's in company B, and she's like she's come in to do the merger. She's come in to what was the phrase you used the other day? Listen, nothing's transformation. She's the transformation thingy, and he's like,
yeah, no one's going to get fired. Don't worry. We're just
yeah.
here to look at everybody in the team and see how much work they do and see
Yeah.
where we can cut things. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So it's some kind of firm anyway, some kind of vague firm, and she's coming in to cut some members of staff, some team members, right? And
because actually
like
the real concession is their hearts. That's the double part.
Something like that. Yeah. The only thing she couldn't cut was his heart or something like that.
That sounds weird.
Yeah,
sort
it
of
does.
like
But
you know how in Stranger Than Fiction, like he's an auditor, isn't he? And then but then he ends up falling in love with old what's her chops, Maggie Gyllenhaal, doesn't he? Like that.
Yeah,
that's a nice touchstone.
It needs
nice
to be
touchstone,
terrible,
but it would be,
and it needs to be like really sort of. I think like the idea of like maybe he's the hotshot Don Draper of the movie. She has to cut somebody, and it has to be him, and she has like 6 weeks to cut him. Even though everybody in the office loves him, but she doesn't know why everybody loves him. Why does everybody love you in the office? You're a bell end.
Yeah, you're bell end. You don't get any work. You don't hit your targets.
Like, then she finds out why he's the heart and soul of the office, and and does something else. And I'll cut myself, and I'll save my other company so much money that they won't have to fire somebody from this company. You know what I mean? Shit like
ridiculous.
That. It's got to be terrible. I want the actors to be more terrible than you think of immediately. So I don't want it to be Jennifer Garner, Jennifer Aniston, Matthew McConaughey. I don't want it to be them. I want it to be someone people worse.
Matthew Lillard.
Matthew Lillard. Listen, no, Breckin Meyer.
Meyer. Who's the other guy? Dane Cook. You could have as well.
Cook. Jesus. Yeah. Dane Cook is the office bellend, obviously.
Of course,
that works with his spiky hair and like.
Matthew
Lillard is on the front desk. He's like the son of the old security guard that used to work there. He was passed away, but he's his son, and he was trained up on how to be a security guard, but he's fairly new on the job. Everyone calls him Junior. That's his name. I don't know. Breckin Meyer, okay, I want maybe someone one notch up from Breckin Meyer, but still a whole load of notches down from everyone else.
We're just slacking off actors now, aren't we? That's what they used to do back in the day.
I don't know. We'll figure out something.
Are we saying this is shot now or shot in the 90s?
No, it's definitely like early 2000s, like late 90s, early 2000s, mid 2000s. Like
what's the guy? What's the guy
we haven't quite got to Devil Wears Prada where it starts to get fun. It's still bad.
His name's just gone up from American Pie.
Not the mate, not Jason Biggs.
Jason Biggs.
Yeah, it's Jason Biggs. All right, yeah, of course it's Jason Biggs. But we need to find someone, his female lead, that's comparable.
Brittany Murphy.
Brittany Murphy, yeah. Not to sort of desecrate the somebody's memory. Because she did some fantastic work in like 8 Mile and stuff like that. But they might have thought, oh, let's sort of cast her as this type of role, and it just
because they like couldn't get Reese Witherspoon.
Yeah. Or who's the one from
Clueless?
No, I'm thinking of
or Mandy Moore as well. Couldn't get Mandy Moore either.
Mandy Moore's good. Or the oh man, she's quite high profile, but still would do trash like this. She was from Almost Famous.
Brittany Murphy was in Clueless.
Yeah. Yeah, Brittany Murphy's a good shout, actually, like, because it's just two people who may have been on their career up, but just did a film that was a stinker.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely. And that's Double Indemnity. And they, I can see them both back to back on the poster and like, arms folded and all. And
he's got he's got a cup that says like world's best boss, and she's got a cup that's like world's worst boss.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, something like that. We still need a good tagline for it, but I'm sure someone will put in something in the comments. That'll be my tweet that follows on from what I thought of Justice League. Justice is Grey.
What's your Double Indemnity going to be?
Yeah, what's the tagline going to be? All right. Well, that's my Double Indemnity, and you're good. The third man. I'm chuffed with both of those. Short and sweet. Which is more than I can say for the rest of this episode. But
yeah, that's very true. And we ain't cut none of it. So if you made it this far, thank you. You've just like the way that black and white films aren't. This is not short, because I only had limited space and budget for camera.
Older films were long though. Like if you look at things like
they were just always longer
and Sound of Music and stuff, they're like 3 hours long.
Yeah, we've got a whole other episode for TV
adding
musicals.
Intermissions and so on, right? So they were crackers. But let's just say this is more like a sort of whatever, 10 Commandments or something. It's one of those. It's not black and white, but it's still a Cecil B. DeMille epic.
But we're interested because we'd love to expand our horizon on some black and white films, modern ones that we haven't seen, hadn't mentioned, and other ones that you may have watched with a grandparent. Or with a parent, a film that you would have loved that you saw in black and white and has always sort of stayed with you.
Yeah,
it doesn't have, can be like there's a lot of fantastic like black and white French cinema as well, and Italian cinema. So if there is something that we've missed, let us know. Slash Dupe on everything. You can just Google it, Slash Dupe, because we're that good. We've beaten Google, right? We've beaten everybody else in the world. Except
I was finding the exact quote that George Miller said, and I had to put Slash Dupe George Miller in.
Yeah,
right, which we didn't have to do before we started.
And I went on like DuckDuckGo, and I went on
Bing.
what the other one is,
and
I searched Slash Dupe, and it was just us. So we're doing really well. So please, as Sean said at the beginning, smash all the buttons, like, share, subscribe. If you're watching this all the way to the end, we love you. We really do. You've made it through our own black and white film. Tell us what your favorite is, because that's going to spark conversation, and that's what we really want. Yeah,
if you're here at the end, then you're the real one, like us.
You're the real one.
You're the real one. You're one of us. And you're happy to have our nonsense in the background, or you're engaged. Either way, we really appreciate it. It means the world to us. And it keeps us, every time you share, even once, every time you subscribe or tell someone about us or click, the little like or anything like that.
One of my tears goes back into my eyes. That's what it happens.
And it keeps us being able to do this, which we love doing. And we love doing it for people like you. So thank you very much, Ryan, for being here. And thank you to everybody listening or watching. And we'll see you for the next one.
Bye-bye.